I was brought up in a kind of wealthy family, Jewish, in Atlanta, Georgia. And we were Reformed Jews, so we didn't study Hebrew, and there was no bar mitzvah. And at that time, there wasn't bat mitzvahs. And I was very interested in religion, and I believed in God, and I was very interested in philosophy and the arts. But I wasn't in a religious family. So I was living in a hippie crash pad with 2 children, and I went to the Golden Gate Park one day, and I was really depressed, and we lost our luggage and were wearing rags. I had a baby on my back and a toddler holding my hand, and we're walking up the hill from the Golden Gate Park on Stanton Street, and Brahmananda came running uphill. And he came up to me and he showed me a BTG and he said, "We humbly request that you chant these holy names of God. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and your life will be sublime." So eventually I did, and my life is sublime, but not immediately. I took the magazine and he asked for a donation, and I gave him 3 cents, and they were allowed to give them away at 25 cents. So he took the magazine back and gave me a card with the Maha Mantra on it and the address of the Frederick Street Temple. So this was January when I went to Maui, and this was the summer of '71. And I had been living at the Atlanta Temple for a few months. And Prabhupada was coming to Atlanta. Hridayananda and Ananga Manjari had opened a temple in Gainesville, and they got a space for Prabhupada on a TV show. So he flew from New York to Gainesville, and then on the way back to Atlanta, he had a 2.5-hour stop at the airport. So we were in ecstasy, and this would be my first time meeting Srila Prabhupada. And we had to get the room that they either gave it to us or rented it in the airport. It was a big room, and it had an accordion door that could close to cut off part of it. And we built a little portable Vyasasan in the Kumkum, who had just moved in right when we found out. I think when Prabhupada came, she'd only been in the temple 2 weeks. She knew the art of smocking, so she made this amazing, beautiful cushion to go on the Vyasasan, and we copied the picture of the Bhagavatams that we would get chapters and paperback of the Bhagavatams, and this one had a picture of Lord Brahma sitting on a Vyasasan speaking to Narada Muni. So we copied that, and then when we got to the room, we put a table, and then we put the seat on top of a table, and it was precarious looking. But because I'd lived in Hawaii, there were no deities. I'd never seen deities. But I knew how to make a garland for humans because I lived in Hawaii and made leis. So I was given the privilege of making the garland for Srila Prabhupada. And they bought roses, red roses, and white and pink carnations. And then someone brought me 2 miniature magnolias. So it was so fragrant. You know, even the carnations were fragrant back then. Now things aren't so fragrant, but I thought I had to use every single flower they gave me. But I did get permission to save out 1 rose so that my 2-year-old could give Prabhupada a flower. And I made the garland. And my 4-year-old wanted to give a flower to Prabhupada too, but I thought that that was incorrect, that men weren't supposed to give Prabhupada a flower. So I wouldn't give him a flower. So we hopped in the van, we got to the airport, and we headed to a big window where we could see the plane land on the tarmac. And then Prabhupada would come down a metal ladder and then walk across the tarmac and enter right where we were standing. And my son was missing. So anyway, he comes back before Srila Prabhupada lands, and he found a flower growing in the airport. So he had his flower to give Prabhupada. And then we're all watching, and the plane lands, and the door opens, and people start pouring out. And suddenly the door lights up, and there's Srila Prabhupada in saffron silk with his head held high. He had a cane in one hand, and it, like in a movie when the hero used to come, there'd be some unknown wind blowing only the hero's clothes. So Prabhupada's dhoti was blowing in the wind, and then he started walking down the steps, and he held his head high and just reminded me of a lion. And then when he got to the bottom, he stepped over to the side on the tarmac, and Jamanjaya was with him. And Balavanta stepped forward with the garland I'd made. So Srila Prabhupada put the marigold garland he was wearing on Jamanjaya, and then Balavanta put the garland I'd made on Srila Prabhupada, and it went all the way to his feet. And then he began walking across the tarmac, and his feet were not touching the ground. He looked like a swan gliding across a lake. And he came in, and we chanted wildly and followed him to the room. It was large and bright colored. And he did not want to get up on that Vyasa-san. He looked at it, he was no, but they insisted. And I don't remember what two people actually almost picked him up and sat him on the table, stood him on the table, and he sat down. And when he sat down, he immediately emanated a blue effulgence, really bright and big. And I turned to my husband, because in order to live in the temple, I, of course, had to marry my boyfriend. You know, we were not married because we were being alternative, but now we were married. We turned to each other and we said, "Do you see that?" And he said, "Yes, but we probably shouldn't say anything because people will think we're having an LSD flashback." So we didn't say anything. And then years later, when the Prabhupada's Leelamrita came out, everyone interviewed in the book said, "And on that day, Srila Prabhupada was emanating a blue effulgence."
I was brought up in a godly way by my mother. I was actually quite serious about Christianity as a child and as a teenager. But, well, certain things happened in my teenage years with some, I wasn't abused, but there was abuse within the church that I was involved with. And that coincided with, rock and roll and graduating from high school and going to university during the Vietnam War. So I had a period of, I guess, 5, 6 years where I just put all that on hold and I got involved in drama. I was, that's a very interesting thing too, because from, I guess, the age of 16 to when I first, well, when I moved into the temple a little after my 24th birthday, those 8 years I was very much involved in drama, dramatic arts. It occurred to me that just like Haridas Thakur says, you say the syllables of the holy name in any way, they have an effect. So I was saying drama, drama, drama so often. Well, anyway, I graduated from university end of 1971, and it was around that time that I was having my first encounters with Krishna consciousness, not even conscious of what I was encountering, but being affected. Like My Sweet Lord was a big influence on me. I was traveling home from a party in Adelaide, South Australia, one night and had the radio and on came My Sweet Lord. And it really had a deep effect on me. I was very moved by that song. And not long after that was the end of my university, and we had a New Year's Eve party where all the people who were in my fraternity met and had a kind of farewell party. And that night, somebody showed up with the Radha Krishna Temple album. And this is in Adelaide, South Australia, 1971, 10,000 miles from London. And I started listening to that album. And the lyrics to the songs were on a sheet inside the dust cover. So I was reading them and singing along with Govinda prayers and Hare Krishna mantra. And I just found that a very, very beautiful experience that night. I remember one night I was at a satsang with some Guru Maharaj people, and they were talking about knowledge and God. And I just asked the question, does anybody know who God is? And the leader of the satsang, she turned to me and she said, the Hare Krishnas know who God is. And that just like stunned me. I said, what? And she said it again. She said, the Hare Krishnas know who God is. But it wasn't long after that that somebody gave me a Back to Godhead magazine. And a couple of days later, I went to the temple and took prasadam, um, started looking at more BTGs. They had a they had a ring binder folder with many different BTGs in it, and just looking at the covers of those things was expanding my mind like anything. And the devotees could see that, I was definitely affected, and they thought, well, we got a right one here. So they ended up sending me a whole bunch more books that night. And then they said, we're going to greet the deities now. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, what's that? And all the devotees lined up on one side of the temple room in a line. And I'm thinking, what is this? But because I was a guest, they had me up the front. So I'm standing up the front. And then they blow the conch shell. They open the curtains. And in those days, they used to burn frankincense in the deity room before that. So the curtains open, this huge cloud of smoke comes out. And Radha Ballabha in Melbourne, he's got conch shell eyes. So just as that smoke was clearing, I saw the deities. I saw Krishna's eyes, and then I saw the deities. And at that moment, somebody turned around and pressed the recording for Govinda prayers. Now, I hadn't heard Govinda prayers since that night in 1971, 3 years before, and I'd forgotten all about it. And suddenly the first bars of Govindam prayers started playing, and I'm looking at Krishna. And all the devotees hit the floor. And I just, oh, this is that. Oh my God. There wasn't much looking back after that.
So the devotees had prepared a play for Srila Prabhupada, the cobbler and the Brahmin. So um, so the play began with Narada Muni coming in, and he meets the Brahmin and he meets the cobbler, and the story is that the Brahmin's proud, and Narada Muni says, "I'm going to see." He says, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to see Vishnu." And the Brahmin's all proud. And when Narada Muni came back, he told the Brahmin, Vishnu said, "Tell both the Brahmin and the cobbler that what I was doing, and tell him I was threading an elephant through the eye of a needle." So he told the Brahmin that. He says, "That's impossible. You didn't see Vishnu. He couldn't do that." And the cobbler said, "Oh, my Lord is so wonderful. He can, not only can he thread an elephant through the eye of a needle, he can create a huge banyan tree from a tiny little seed." So the play began with Narada Muni entering the room. And when he saw Srila Prabhupada, this was a 19-year-old devotee brahmachari named Jayasena, who's still in the movement. When he saw Prabhupada, he paid his full dandavats. He was totally overwhelmed. And then he got up and he paid his dandavats to him in another direction and another direction. And he paid obeisances to everyone in the room, and he paid obeisances to the walls. And Srila Prabhupada said, "Just see, Narada Muni is so humble that he pays his obeisances to everyone. He's so humble." And then he started narrating the play like he was rehearsed and knew the whole play. And he narrated the entire play. The actors continued acting, and Srila Prabhupada became the official narrator. And that quality of how he turned something into a Krishna conscious point. Everything that happened, it could be used in Krishna's service, or it could be used to make a point. So after the play, we gave him some prasadam, and I was impressed by the first thing is he took a piece of prasadam of watermelon and leaned his head back and tossed it in his mouth. It was so elegant. And then they closed that accordion door I told you about earlier, and he took some prasadam. And then when they opened it, this Indian gentleman was sitting at the foot of the Vyasasana, and Srila Prabhupada began speaking with him, asked him why he was in America and what did he do. And he said, "I'm a biologist at Emory University and Hospital." And Srila Prabhupada said, "Oh, so you are killing frogs?" And he says, "We are killing them so that we can understand them better." And Srila Prabhupada said, "I would like to understand you better. May I kill you?" And the Indian gentleman threw himself full dandavats at Srila Prabhupada's feet, kissed his shoes, and said, "You can do with me whatever you like." And then after that, we all exited. And as we came out the door, a devotee from Vaikuntanath, who lived with his mother, who was dying of cancer, wheeled his mother in the wheelchair in front of Srila Prabhupada. And I suppose after seeing the Indian man, she followed suit. She threw herself out of the wheelchair, full dandavats, and said, "Srila Prabhupada, I'm dying." And he patted her, she was on her knees, he patted her on the head and said, "Don't worry, you will be all right." And then we escorted him to the airplane, and he flew away and took our hearts with him. And that was my first meeting with him.
I guess the first memory of Srila Prabhupada in that regard was at the Hyderabad festival, at the Hyderabad Pandal. It was like a 5-night pandal. We were out doing Harinam every day. And suddenly I'm seeing all these people, Vishnu Jan Swami and Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and all these big devotees that I'd heard about. And of course, Charu Prabhu was my first temple president. So I was very taken with Charu and his preaching. But anyway, I think one very distinct memory from that pandal was one night there were always devotees sitting on the stage looking at Prabhupada, and maybe 5,000 people at the pandal behind that. And Prabhupada was up on a big asana. And in question time, maybe the first night, I can't remember, but there were maybe 60 devotees sitting on the stage. I was off at the side. And this Indian gentleman got up and he says to Prabhupada, "Oh, Swamiji, can you do miracles?" And Prabhupada sat there for a moment and he put his head back, so proud, put his head back. And he gestured like that, big sweeping gesture to all his disciples on the stage. And he said, "This is my miracle." All the devotees just went crazy. Jai, Srila Prabhupada, Jai, Jai, Jai. But it was he was so proud of his disciples, I could see that, but he was also so humble about that this is the miracle, that all these young boys and girls have become devotees of Krishna.
I told the story of my initiation previously. I was sobbing and crying the whole time, and I reached for my bead. I was careful to say, the four regulative principles in 16 rounds at least, not just 16 rounds. And then when Prabhupada went, I saw him chant on my beads personally. That was very wonderful. And then when he handed the beads to me, I had surgery on my right hand, and I reached with my left hand, and he said, "Your right hand," and I didn't understand what he said. And he said it a few times, and then Nanda Kumar elbowed me and said, "Your right hand." So I reached with my right hand. And then he said, "So your name is," and it sounded like he said Barbara, which was already my name. So I thought maybe he wasn't going to initiate me after all, So then he left, and there was a fire sacrifice. Bhagavan did the fire sacrifice. Then I walked out, and I was standing in between the hallway with the door to the temple at that time. Now it's in the other room, but a different room. But Nanda Kumar came up to me and he said, "So, Srila Prabhupada has named you." And I thought he said Brahmacharini. And I had 3 children and I was pregnant. But I thought, well, at least it's Sanskrit. And then he handed me a paper and it said Bhavatarini. And he said, and that's Srila Prabhupada's sister's name. And they didn't have a name picked out for you, so he named you after his sister on the spot. So that was just, I just was in heaven. It was amazing. I wasn't really informed about Guru Dakshin. When I got first initiation, Nanda Kumar said, "Oh, now you're supposed to give Guru Dakshin to Srila Prabhupada." And so he told me to get him royal jelly, so I did that. So I didn't have anything for Prabhupada, and I had no idea of how I could give him Guru Dakshin. But Jayananda knocked on my door and he said, "I'm going to see Srila Prabhupada in LA. Do you have anything to give him for Guru Dakshin?" And I told the story before, how that was, that there was a drawing I'd done of Krishna in the clouds with Om, and he took that. He said that would be nice, gave that to Prabhupada. And then he said, "Do you have any questions?" So I had just read a book by Bhaktisiddhanta that we were allowed to read. There was one copy. And in it, he said, the only question you should ever ask your spiritual master is, how may I serve you best? So I said, please ask him, how may I serve you best? So the reply in the letter was um, uh, to thank Bhavatarini Dasi, Devi Dasi, for her drawing of Gopal Krishna. And as far as how she can serve me, the best service is to chant Hare Krishna always and spread it to every town and village. So I've kept those instructions in my heart. And also, sometimes I would say, oh, I need to get a mridanga and start walking to every town and village. But actually, by doing recordings, I've been able to get chanting around the world. So that was very significant.
Anyway, at that time, there were hundreds and hundreds of devotees there. And it was a grand festival, the installation of Krishna Balaram Mandir. And I was there. I was standing at the back of the Darshan Mandap in front of Krishna Balaram altar while Prabhupada did that initial arti ceremony. He had a big initiation along with the installation of the deities. And then he left and went on his tour and went to Australia. But he came back, and over those months, 75, 76, into 77, until he departed, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan a lot, came and went a lot of times. So he came back. He came back after a few months, and he was in Vrindavan through Janmashtami into Radhastami. And he held another initiation, all Indian initiation, for Radhastami in 1975. And that's when I got initiated. It was a big initiation. I think it was maybe 30, 40 devotees, mainly Western devotees who were in different places all over India, as well as in Vrindavan. They all came to Vrindavan. So I still get goosebumps when I think of this, because in now, all of the ISKCON gurus, so far as I can see, they make a point of being present at the initiation of all their disciples. But in those days, it was a different thing. Devotees would be recommended from their temple by the temple president or GBC. Prabhupada would write back, say, yes, I accept these people. You chant on their beads and then do their initiation. Prabhupada wasn't there, but Prabhupada was in Vrindavan. So I suddenly found myself kneeling in front of my spiritual master. And it was quite an incident, because Akshayananda Swami was the temple president, and he was sitting in the courtyard where the fire yajna was to be, and we were all sitting around. And as we were called, we'd come up, and Prabhupada was sitting on the central surround area where they do Prabhupada's Guru Puja now. Prabhupada was sitting there on his asana. So I got called up, and Prabhupada first would ask, so what are the principles? And said what the principles were. Voice was shaking. And then how many rounds? And so 4 principles, what they were, and then 16 rounds a day. And at that time, then Brahmananda Swami, was Prabhupada's secretary. And unbeknownst to me, he had the job of choosing the names for the new initiates. And Brahmananda, this big-bodied man standing there, and his big arm, and he had all the beads of all the initiates on his arm, and he's taking them off one by one with their name. So he passed my beads to Prabhupada, and he said a name which I didn't hear, but as he said it, Akshayananda Swami, he's sitting there, and he told me after it was involuntary, but when he heard that, he said no. When he heard the name, he just went no. And I looked at him, and everybody looked at him, and then everybody looked back at Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was looking at Brahmananda with a look on his face, and no, didn't say anything. He just shook his head. And then he went into a little reverie. He just looked at the space in front of himself for a minute. And then he went, hmm. And he looked at me and he gave me my beads and he said, "Your name is Bhagavat Ashraya." It was definitely a very special moment for me. But Prabhupada was, Prabhupada was so low key, so underplayed with everything. He didn't make a big deal. And he just did that, and he looked away, and I just paid my obeisances, and off I went. Yeah.
In September that year, his birthday was on my daughter's birthday. She was turning 4. And I said, "What do you want for your birthday?" And she said, "A Gopi doll, a Mother Yashoda doll." And I said, "What do you want to give Prabhupada?" And she said, "A Radharani doll." So we took several buses and went to the only Indian store in Los Angeles, and we found diorama style dolls, made out of straw and then clay. And one looked like it could be Mother Yashoda, and the other one looked like Radharani to us. So we put tilak on her. And at the morning walk, this day it wasn't the morning walk. Prabhupada was going to the airport to leave. So we got to the car and the door was opened. He was going to drive off. And I actually leaned into the car with my daughter so that I'm practically on Prabhupada's lap. And I said, "It's her birthday too today, and she wants to give you this doll." And he said, "Thank you." And he took his gardenia garland off and he put it on Kunti. And then he took the doll. And as they drove off, he was looking at the doll with so much love. It was just tangible. You could feel it.
The thing that really struck me was one morning. I was the temple commander at this time, and Prabhupada had come to visit Vrindavan. So I had the opportunity to go on the morning walk and so we went on the morning walk up Chatikara Road, and we came back. And when Prabhupada would come back from the morning walk, he'd circumambulate the temple 3 times, and then he'd go in the lower door in front to the altars, and then he'd greet the deities, and then Guru Puja and so forth. So at that time, there was a lot of things being stolen out of the Brahmachari ashram. Watches and tape recorders and cameras and dhotis and all kinds of things were disappearing, being stolen. And I was the temple commander, and I had my suspicions about this one particular person, because he was just not present to any service that I had to oversee him do. In fact, there was this big scaffolding that was still on the mandap, big wooden horse that was there so that all of the teardrop hangings could be put on the chandeliers. And it was a big thing, but it only had wooden wheels about this wide, about that by that. So it was very difficult to move it. You had to be very careful how you moved it, and not drag it across the floor. And we were there cleaning one day, and it had to be moved. And I said to him and a couple of other devotees, "You have to now move this." And he just grabbed it and pulled it, and it marked the floor. And I thought, there's something not right here. And then all the stealing was going on, and I just had a funny feeling about him. So anyway, this morning, we're walking down the side of the temple, And I was just behind Prabhupada, and Akshayananda Swami was walking next to him, and he said, Srila Prabhupada, I think some of the some devotees are stealing things. And Prabhupada, he just said, they're not devotees, they are thieves. And just as he said that, we were by the middle door of the temple on the side, and who should step out of the temple room but this person? And as soon as he saw Prabhupada, he was very sheepish. And he stood there and he pulled his ears and he had a really like scared rabbit look on his face. And Prabhupada just glanced at him and walked on. And then a few yards down, he said, that man is a thief. And everybody was like, oh. And he said, and his father before him, his father is a thief. And then he said, and his father before him was a thief. And then he started to chuckle and he said, in this way, evam parampara praptam. And everybody just broke up laughing. But I was thinking, yes, yes. So later that day, Bhagavat, big Bhagavat, he was there. And he did a snap check on this devotee's ashram room, and they found everything. All the cameras, all the phones stuck under the bed. There was money and all they found everything. So I was very impressed by that. Prabhupada was so grave and so cool. He just looked at the boy and walked on, and he just said, that man's a thief. And he was right.
Every day we would go to class in the temple, and Srila Prabhupada would, come in and greet the deities. I think I told how he goes to each altar and takes the Charnamrita. And Vishal, every morning, would get in front of Srila Prabhupada and go on his knee and say something to Prabhupada to praise him or something like that. And the two that stand out, because I saw him do it maybe 100 times, the two that stand out in my mind is one time he said, absolute is sentient, thou hast proved. In personal calamity, thou hast removed. And Prabhupada was so pleased. He was rubbing his head and laughing. And then another time he said, Srila Prabhupada, I am the most fallen. And Prabhupada said, you are not the most anything. So he could praise you or he could chastise you, but it didn't decrease his love for you. Vishal didn't feel unloved. Prabhupada was going to come to a puppet show, and it was about Sudama Vipra, and I had a guitar, and we had a Vyasasana for Srila Prabhupada to watch the show, and he didn't show up. So I sang the song, and then later on, Nanda Kumar said, when Srila Prabhupada heard you singing, he ran down the steps and he didn't enter the room, but he listened to you sing and he said, very nice. And so so Nanda Kumar said he's confirming your using your singing and the guitar for preaching and serving Krishna. So so I continued doing that to this day. I'm still doing that.
So again, I went up and I said, try, I couldn't get past Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He said, no, no, no way, Prabhupada's too sick, he's too weak, he's not going to do this. And Prabhupada could hear him and he said, what is that? What is that? And then he said, oh, there's people here for a darshan, Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada said, let them come. And he came into the room and sat down, and he was so tired and weak, he just was like collapsed back into this big bolster. And he was taking questions. We had a little microphone because you could barely hear him speak, but he was answering people's questions. And then there was this man here. I can't remember who he was, and maybe I never even seen him before, but somehow he was there. And he started putting a whole Mayavad philosophy towards Prabhupada. And I looked at Prabhupada, and Prabhupada just transformed. He was listening to the man, and then he looked at him, and he realized what this man was saying. And he went, hmm? And then he sat up, bolt upright, just like up like from 0 to 60. He just sat there and he just dismantled this man's philosophy. And I could see, here's Prabhupada living that pranam, just never Sesha Sunyavadi, Gauravani, never Sesha Sunyavadi, Paschatyadesh. And he just sat there like that and just boom, 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 boom. And then Tamal Krishna Maharaj stepped in and said, all right, that's enough. And said, everybody has to leave now. So everybody got up and filed out, and Prabhupada sat there the whole time, just like a like a like a gladiator. He was just, and as soon as the room emptied, he just collapsed back into the bolster. And then Tamal Krishna Maharaj helped him up, and he went and took rest. That was the first time he visited Delhi.
So in 71, the only Tulsis in the movement were in Hawaii. And I had seen them in Hawaii and developed a great attachment to them, to her. And so I was living in the Atlanta Temple, and Indira, who was married to Vaman Dave, one of Prabhupada's first female disciples, she somehow or other got Tulsi plants and made cuttings of the Tulsi and mailed them to all the temples, and they arrived dead. And so Srila Prabhupada said, no, you should not propagate Tulsi by making cuttings, do it by seed. So they were successful at New Vrindavan, and they brought 6 plants from New Vrindavan to Atlanta and gave me the service of taking care of them. And my plants were so healthy. There were maybe 25 temples in the US, counting Hawaii. So Hawaii, of course, the Tulsis were fabulous, but out of the 25 temples, I was told that my Tulsis were the healthiest and the best. I never saw the letters, but because everyone was saying my Tulsis were the best in the movement, Kirtananda came to the Atlanta temple and he said, if you have any questions on Tulsi care, I will ask Srila Prabhupada on your behalf. And so I never saw the answers, but I received the replies from Kirtananda. I asked, can Tulsi be pruned? And I asked, what kind of fertilizer can we use for Tulsi? And if she has a disease or some problem, can we consult with non-devotee plant experts? So the answer to the first question was no, she cannot be pruned, but when you gather the leaves and manjaris, you can cut down 2 sets of leaves. And if the branches and leaves are diseased, you can cut them off. And if they die, you can cut off the dead branches. On fertilizer, he said cow manure. And on using non-devotees for Tulsi care, he said yes, you can consult experts on plants for taking care of Tulsi. So those were my instructions from him.
Early in 1976, when Prabhupada arrived in Vrindavan one time, Hari Sori, who was Prabhupada's personal servant and his masseur, was very sick. Now, Hari Sori was the first devotee I ever really met. He's the longest standing friend I have in my devotional life. And he'd come to Vrindavan, and everybody knows the story of how he ended up with Prabhupada and was with him for 18 months. But on this occasion, when they came to Vrindavan, he was too sick to massage Srila Prabhupada. So he told Harikesh Maharaj, who was Prabhupada's secretary at that time, that I could massage and that I could step in. So I'd done that for about 10 days. So as a result of that experience early in 76, Prabhupada, I had very intimate dealings with Srila Prabhupada. And there's a funny story related to that. But jumping forward again to that later time in 1977, the same kind of thing happened that happened that night in 1977, but not to the same degree. But I went into Srila Prabhupada's rooms in the afternoon as we were leaving to go traveling. We would go from Vrindavan to Mathura by Tonga, and we'd get on a train and we'd go to wherever we were going, into Rajasthan or UP or MP. So this time we were going to Kanpur. And in those days, there was no closed-in veranda. And the little ante-room to Prabhupada's darshan room wasn't open to the big room behind. It was just a little room where the secretary sat. So I knew Prabhupada's schedule. And so I knew there was no guard and there was no secretary. So I just went in and I knocked on his darshan door, the room door, because I knew at that time he'd had his afternoon nap and he'd be chanting japa in his darshan room. So I knocked on the door and I stepped in and I offered my obeisances. Now I think now, what was I? I was 26 years old. I think now, I'm 76 years old. I don't think I'd have the courage to do something like that now. But I was just, I'll do it. So I knocked on the door, I stepped into the room and paid my obeisances at the door, and Prabhupada, sure enough, was sitting in his asana in the corner chanting japa. So I paid my obeisances and he was chanting and he saw me come and I got up and I walked right across the room and I sat down on the floor next to him. And he didn't stop chanting japa the whole time. He just watched me come and he just was chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And I sat there for a couple of minutes and he kept chanting till finally he just kind of looked at me and just, what do you want? But he knew me, so it was kind of real casual. He said, well, what do you want? Just with his head gesture. So I started saying, I said, I'm going on taking a party out. We're going to Kanpur and then he was immediately interested. Oh, what are you doing? And I said, well, we're doing life membership, and now we're starting to do Back to Godhead. Well, the Back to Godhead Hindi was called Bhagavat Darshan magazine, and we were starting to distribute them shop to shop in the bazaars, and some devotees were starting to do books like that as well. So he was very chuffed about that. He liked that. And then of course it got to the point where I had nothing more to say. So I'm sitting there looking at him and he was looking at me and he just started chanting japa again. And he chanted again for a few minutes and I sat there. And then he kind of just sat back and he looked at me and he said, you just chant your rounds every day and chant your Gayatris. And he said, everything will come. And he said, just like drops of water on a stone, with his index finger on his left hand, he went drip, drip, drip on his desk. And each time he did it, he touched the table, drip, drip, drip. And then he rubbed his finger and he said, soon a hole is coming. And then he had a certain way of gesturing sometimes when he'd make a point where he'd put this thumb on this finger and he'd make a point. And he'd say, he said, just like this translating. And he gestured with his finger like this. He said, every day, because his books were on display behind him. He said, just like this translating. He said, every day, little translating. And then he said, some days, hardly one sentence. And he opened his eyes really wide and looked at me and he said, so many books are coming. And again, it was like a moment where he just looked at me and I looked at him and I just thought, oh my God, what a thing to say. Just chant your rounds every day and chant your Gayatris and everything will come. So then I just sat and looked at him for a moment and then I did my pranams and I said, I'll take your leave now and go. And he waved me and away I went.
He was very relaxed. He was sitting at a low table wearing a gamsha and leaning back with his hand behind his head and his leg crossed over. And he was chanting japa, and he wanted me to like chant japa with him. And it was like part of the instructions. It was like at one point I was thinking, maybe the way I'm giving the money should be done like Rupa Goswami. So I didn't realize it at the time, but he was trying to give me instructions for me to give up my material life and totally surrender and go to Vrindavan and chant, and I could continue my spreading the holy name through recordings. And he said, all I desire is that you chant at least 16 rounds and follow the rules and regulations and live in association with devotees, which I wasn't able to do by living in that apartment. But then the devotee that came in with me, she asked her question, and she had further, in the class that day, she had said, she had heard that Siddhaswarupananda, who was breaking away from the movement, that he and his followers were doing that because they were envious. So she asked Srila Prabhupada in class, thinking it was for the benefit of Siddhaswarupananda's followers and Siddhaswarupananda, how do you become free from envy? And Prabhupada looked her straight in the eye and said, don't envy the spiritual master. So she said to me, it was really important that she come with me because Srila Prabhupada misunderstood her question and she needed to find out more about the answer. So I had her come in. So Prabhupada answered the question. She said, can you explain further how to become free from envy? And he said, just like Prahlad Maharaj, he was never envious. He was never afraid. When something good came, he thought, oh, here's my Lord, here is Krishna. And when something bad came, he thought, oh, here's my Lord, here is Krishna. And he visibly relished when something bad coming more than when something good was coming, which was very impressive. And then she asked him another question, and he said, read my books, it's all in my books. So then she sat back, and then we continued just being in the room chanting. And then my toddler Nipana, she started playing with the papers on his desk, and he motioned me, and I brought her away. And then she started playing with his feet, so I went to grab her, and he said, the papers she should not touch, but my feet, they are hers. So that is all right. My feet, that is all right. They are hers. So then we continued chanting, and she was getting a little restless. So Prabhupada drank some water, you know, how he'd lean back and pour it into his mouth. And then he took the silver cup and he placed it on Nipana's lips. And she was getting tired and fussy, so she threw herself on the floor and banged her head, which toddlers do a lot, and then they start screaming. So she banged her head on the floor, and before she could scream, Prabhupada pointed and said, "Look, you broke the floor. Your head is not broken, but the floor. You've broken the floor." And so while she was looking at the floor and rubbing it, he motioned me to take her out. And that was the end of the personal darshan and instructions.
Prabhupada arrived in Vrindavan, and I guess it was sometime early 76, something like that. And Hari Suri had a terrible fever. He could barely get off the floor. He was so sick. So anyway, in those days, the Samadhi wasn't built. There was the big fountain that went from the front gate, which was always open in those days, the front gate with that big fountain. And the mud huts that were there for the devotees where the Samadhi now stands, they were still there. And opposite, the construction of the Gurukul was going on. And there was a wall there where now there's that other half of the Samadhi. And in those days, there was a snack bar there where you could get French fries. So this was like mid-morning, and I was up there getting my morning snack of French fries, sitting there eating my French fries. And all of a sudden, Harikesh was standing next to me. And he said, Bhagavat Ashraya, Hari Suri is too sick to do Prabhupada's massage. He says you can do it, so you have to go now and get ready and get into Prabhupada's room within the next 10 minutes. And my first reaction was, oh, yeah, okay. I thought he was kidding me. Because, you know, Harikesh was always like very grave. And I went to take more chips, and he said, no, I'm serious. You got to go now. And I looked at him and I realized he was serious. And I thought, oh my God, I got to go and massage Prabhupada. And I ran down. In those days, the Brahmachari ashram was in the inner part of the guest house. The guest house had an open atrium, and with the guest house rooms were on the outside, and then there was a staircase went up around on the inside, and there were rooms there, and that was the Brahmachari ashram. So I was in there and up to my room and had a shower and put tilak on in my dhoti, in my longi, gamsha, and next thing I'm in Prabhupada's bedroom. And Prabhupada was sitting with, I think, Harikesh, I think Jagadish was there, Ashraya Swami, and they were talking with Prabhupada. And I came in and I sat down. Prabhupada looked at me and then he ignored me, just didn't look at me again. And started carried on talking. They were talking about correspondence or whatever. And then Hari Suri comes in and he's all shivery and shaky. And well, actually, before I went into Prabhupada's room, I had to go and see him, and he had to tell me what I had to do. And he gave me a quick rundown on how you massage Prabhupada, like 2 minutes. So then I'm there waiting, and in comes Hari Suri, and the secretaries, they all left, and it was Hari Suri standing there, and Prabhupada was sitting. He was already in his gamsha, ready for the massage. And then Hari Suri introduced me. He said, this is Bhagavat Ashraya. He's going to be standing in for the massage. And that was the first time Prabhupada looked at me. And he looked at me, and Hari Suri's talking. And then he said to Hari Suri, does he know the art? And Hari Suri says, well, he says he knows how to do it, Prabhupada. So I don't know. I'm going to just leave you in his hands. So Prabhupada said, okay. And off Harisori went. And you had two bottles of oil. One was sandalwood oil that you massage Prabhupada's head. Oh, Harisori didn't go yet. He stayed for the beginning of the massage because uh, first of all, you had to massage Prabhupada's head with with sandalwood oil. And Harisori was very particular. You had to be very careful that you put the bottle and you didn't knock it over. And then there was a bottle of mustard oil that you massaged his body with. And Prabhupada sat cross-legged on the floor with his hands on the floor in front of him. So you had to start with his head. So suddenly I'm like sitting like face to face with Prabhupada. And I have to touch him, and I just thought, oh, I'll just get on with it. And I put sandalwood oil on my hands and I started rubbing his head. And in those days, we used to have a barber used to come once a week and shave devotees' heads. So, I'd watch them how they after the head shave, they'd like do this kind of thing and on your head. And so I was massaging Prabhupada's head, and then I went like this, and he went, oh. And then I started going like this on his head, and he was going, oh, oh. And he looked at Harisori, he said, oh, he knows the art. So with that, Harisori left. And then I'm like just there with Prabhupada. And he went into a reverie. He didn't talk to me. He just sat there and he kind of went into a reverie. I finished his head, and then Harisori had explained to me what to do. So you put the sandalwood oil aside and then take up the mustard oil and go and sit behind Prabhupada and put mustard oil on his back. And Prabhupada liked a really firm massage, pushing hard up and down his back and working. So, I'd had some experience of being massaged and doing massage from all way back when I was doing my actors training. We used to learn all that sort of stuff about how to relax. So I just sort of well, go for it. So I was rubbing Prabhupada up his back and across his shoulders. And he was leaning forward with his hands on the floor. And he really went into a reverie and he just started, and then he went like that as if he was falling asleep, and he pulled himself up and he said, oh, sleep is coming. This is good. So he was really, and I was getting like, wow, yeah, I'm doing pretty good here. And and then you had to, after his back, then you sat on one side and did his one arm, and then you went to the other side, did another arm. And then he would put one leg out and you'd do that leg up and down, and then the other leg up and down, and then some on his chest and his stomach. You had to be very careful not to press too hard there, which I did one time. And he didn't like that. He didn't like that. But that first day, I got through it all pretty well. And then the last thing you do is put a little mustard oil in his hand and go off into his bathroom and run water for his bath. So and while you're doing that, he would massage his ears and his nose and like that. And Prabhupada's bathroom off his bedroom in Vrindavan is like a triangular room, and the doors were in this corner of one wall, and behind those doors were the spigots, the taps, and he had three quite large brass buckets, and one you would fill with really hot water, one you'd fill with cold water, and there was a loader there, and he'd mix them into the third bucket and have his bath. So while I'm doing that, he came into the bathroom, and this wall had a little hand basin on it with a little vanity mirror. And by the time he came in, I'd finished the water and I had nothing else to do. So I went and stood at the doors, and Prabhupada this was maybe 8, 10 feet into the room where that little hand basin was. And he was looking at his teeth. And he was looking at his teeth in the mirror. And I'm standing at the door, and I said, will that be all, Srila Prabhupada? Will there be anything else? And he looked in the mirror at me and he just said, no. And so I stepped back and I closed the doors. And, these double doors in Vrindavan, they have a bolt. I closed the doors and I threw the bolt. And I'm standing there for it was like a split second, and I'm thinking, you idiot, you just locked Prabhupada in his bathroom. But in that instant, from that 8, 10 feet away, Prabhupada had realized what had happened, and he was at the door on the other side. And he started to pull on the door. And I'm trying to pull the bolt, and it's like it's not in sync. So as soon as he'd pull the door, I'd pull the bolt and it'd jam. So this seemed to go on forever. I'm just and in the process of that, I'd got down on my knees and I was and just suddenly when I threw the bolt and the doors flew open. And there I am on my knees. And Prabhupada was standing looking at me, furious. And I remember Hari Sori had told me, he said, Prabhupada had different levels of when he was displeased up to when he was furious. And he said, when he was furious, his lip would quiver. So I'm on my knees looking up at Prabhupada, and all I can see is his lips quivering. I'm thinking, oh my God. I thought, and his eyes were I thought fire was going to come out of his eyes. So I was blubbering. Oh, I'm sorry, Srila Prabhupada. I'm just an idiot. I didn't realize what I was doing. And he looked at me for a moment. And then he kind of, agreed with me. Yeah, you idiot. He didn't say anything. Just said, yeah. And then with his left hand, he just said, so off I went. But that was also inherent in that. Later in the day, I got a real lesson from that, because in the evening, I had to go back and massage him in the evening. So you'd have to come into his darshan room and be there before the end of the darshan and wait till he was ready. And he'd be talking to people. And I came into the room after, and the last, whole 10 hours had passed. And I hadn't seen him. He hadn't seen me. And I came into the room and I sat down near the desk, and he looked at me and he smiled. And I thought, oh, he's not angry with me anymore. It's just that was that, and now get on with it. He was always he never held on to, he would go there, get angry, but then let's go on now, let's get on with it. So then now the nighttime was very challenging, because this is after 9 o'clock at night. Everyone's gone to bed. The deities have been put to rest. And then Prabhupada would walk out the back door of his rooms on his back veranda into the corner, and then there was an internal staircase that went up around to the roof. So I followed him up, and he walked up around there through his little bhajan kutia where he'd do his translating, and he walked right out the back, and there was a 4-poster bed out the back on the big roof of what was his bedroom. And it had a mosquito net and a lot of pillows because Prabhupada didn't lie down to go to sleep. He got in he climbed in under the mosquito net, and he sat there and he leant back on the pillows, which were like 45 degrees. And I followed him in, and the massage at night was just to sit there next to him while he slept and massage his legs by pressing and squeezing up and down, all the way from his thigh down to the tips of his feet and back up again. And then across to the other leg and do the same thing, back and forth, back and forth. And he got in there and he leant back and he was asleep, just like that. He just went, and he was asleep. So then it's like, you just got to do it. Keep on massaging until whenever. So it's like 10 o'clock, 10:30, it's 11 o'clock, and I'm starting to, I'm dropping off to sleep. And all of a sudden he woke up and he just sat up. And this is something I noticed then. And then later on in 1977, when he visited Delhi one time, and he was taking rest up on the roof of the temple because it was a very hot night, and he was asleep, and I was standing watch. And I noticed this night in Vrindavan, and again that night in Delhi, he went to sleep like that, and then he sat up, awake, totally alert, no sense that he'd been asleep at all. And devotees told me one time, uh, in his last days in Vrindavan, uh, it was the same thing. One time he was preaching and he was talking and he started quoting Advaitam Achyutam Anadyam Ananta, and he fell asleep while he was saying that, and he just drifted off to sleep. And he was asleep for 15 minutes or so. And then he woke up and completed the verse as if nothing had happened. So that was amazing. There was no, he didn't you get up after you sleep, your eyes are, and he just sat up, bang, wide awake. And then he said, come on, you're falling asleep. Come on, we'll go. So then I followed him and he sat down in his little kutia and he started translating. And I went and sat out. Well, he said, you're going to take rest. But I had to stay there with him. So I was on a straw mat just outside the window, asleep there. And you had to stay with him until the secretary came just before Mangalati and relieved you. So I fell asleep like, bang, I was gone. And the next thing, I woke up and the conch shells were ringing for Mangalati, and nobody had come to wake me up. So I was leaning out over the balcony, and devotees were running forth. I said, listen, you got to wake Harikesh. And he'd slept in. So somebody went to wake him, and I went back. And lay down again. I was exhausted. And I fell asleep again. And nobody had come. And Prabhupada was like, so Mangalati's going on. I was asleep. Prabhupada was translating still. And then I think he realized, well, wait a minute. Where's Harikesh? Where's Bhagavat Ashraya? So the next thing I know, he's standing over me with his walking stick and he's prodding me in the back. I'm like, I wake up. Prabhupada's standing there. He says, wake up. You're sleeping too much. Wake up. And then I said, well, nobody. And then I woke up, said, nobody come. And then a couple of minutes later, Harikesh came. But I still feel that if I overindulge with sleeping or anything, at some point I still feel that prod in my back and then get up, you lazy bum, get up. So yeah, that was the first day of massaging Prabhupada. But that went on for, I guess, a week or 10 days. It was just magically, by Krishna's arrangement, was just there in my life.
So I was in Hawaii, living in an apartment, about a 20-minute drive, half an hour drive from the temple in Honolulu, which was in Nuana Valley. And Prabhupada was coming for a short visit, and I'd gotten the message that he wanted to speak with me and have a personal meeting, which I'd never had. And it was a short visit, and no one ever brought it up. And so the last day, I came back from the temple, and I thought, I'm not going to speak to Srila Prabhupada. And I was devastated, and I opened the car door to get out, and I just fell out of the car onto the ground. And I was feeling like descriptions of the Brijbasis and the Gopis and Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda when Krishna left. I felt like I was almost dead, and my phone rang. And I went in and they said, Srila Prabhupada is ready to meet with you. And so I drove to the temple, and then I was taken by the temple van to Janaka Rishi's house where Srila Prabhupada was staying. His wife was Pandurani, I think. And I was in the van. The house was down a hill, so I was up on a hill in the van waiting to be called in. And Prabhupada's servant came to me with one of the brownies I'd made for the bake sales. And there was a big bite out of it. And he said, Srila Prabhupada said to tell you to eat this. And I ate that brownie, and I have never experienced anything like it. It wasn't like eating. It wasn't even like honoring prasadam. It was the most amazing experience. And so then they called me in to meet with them, and Nandalal wanted to come with me because which I didn't realize that I shouldn't have let her come with me, because Prabhupada had called me for a very important meeting. But I didn't want to be rude, so I said, okay, she could come in. She wanted to ask him a question. And when I came in, I was in so much anxiety. The first thing I said after paying obeisances is, Prabhupada, about the jewelry. And Prabhupada became furious. He goes, what is this jewelry nonsense? At that time, devotees were, instead of distributing books, they were selling jewelry and just in Maya, like with the jewelry business. So he thought that's what I was referring to. And Sudama said, no, Srila Prabhupada. She means her grandmother's jewelry. And he said, oh. And I said, I gave it to my sister because I owed her money for Gurukula tuition. And he said, that is okay, but a woman should always keep her jewelry. And and then he yelled at me again. He said, why aren't you in Vrindavan? And I was like, I didn't know what to say. And Sudama didn't want me to go to Vrindavan. Now that I was doing these bake sales, making $250 every weekend, which was a lot of money in '74, he didn't want me to go. So he started to say something, but then Srila Prabhupada looked at me and he said, oh, you are very fair. You might get sick, so you can wait until there's nothing in Vrindavan yet. You can wait until something is built and then come. And then, so then I thought, I was going to ask him, how do I get there? But I didn't want to ask for money. And I didn't want to say, well, I'm not there because I gave you all my money and I don't have any money. So I thought, oh, good. Okay, I don't have to go. I don't have to worry about going to Vrindavan right now. So then he spoke some more, and I asked him about the children in Gurukula. He goes, oh, you must go to the Gurukula in Dallas, and you have to make sure that the teachers are teaching them properly. So he had gotten a letter from one of our god sisters that I was close with from Dallas, telling him about the abuse going on, and she had left and mailed the letter not at the temple, and so I had already been in contact with her, and he had asked her, why did you leave? I need you to stay and make it better. So now he was giving me the instruction that I was the one that had to get the Gurukula on the right track. But then he said to Sudama, I want you to go also. He said, actually, I want all my senior devotees, disciples, to go to the Gurukula and get it back on track. So at least I wasn't the only one, but now I needed money again. So I said, what do I do if I need extra money? Excuse me. He said, Sudama said, Srila Prabhupada, she does bake sales. He goes, no, very emphatically, no. And I said, well, I can pick guavas. I saw an ad in the paper. He goes, no, you are a woman, you have a child, you should not strain. I said, well, I like to distribute your books. He goes, yes, you do that. There will be a profit, you keep that.
In many ways, was Prabhupada's humility. Prabhupada, he was a personification of humility. And I've reflected over the years about that, of how if you don't have the eyes to see that, or to understand what that was extreme humility, complete humility, then you can miss Prabhupada's greatness, because I've seen it so many times because of Prabhupada's the way Prabhupada removed himself and just presented himself as a cipher, as the messenger of the Lord. I've seen people waver in their faith in Prabhupada, or they've relativized Prabhupada's position in relationship to others that we don't need to mention over the years, without understanding who he is, and how empowered he is, and how there's nothing like the Bhaktivedanta purports, nothing like it, and how people have thought that there's something else to get from somewhere else. I think in one sense, in that regard, Prabhupada's humility, well, I think it actually protects him as well from these kind of superficial people. But if you get right in there and you observe Prabhupada's humility, and you see it in the way he presents the philosophy, then then you realize this is Prabhupada's greatest quality.
I cannot pick one quality to describe Srila Prabhupada. He's a reservoir of all beautiful qualities and contradictions and harmony and comparisons and mercy, intelligence. And his sister said his best quality was he was an expert musician. He could play any instrument he picked up. And so he was poetic. He was the most amazing musician, singer. To this day, he's my favorite singer. And he knew exactly how to speak to everyone. And his compassion was so great. Even the ants, he would let the ants eat from his plate. It was just, but he was also so humorous. He was so funny. I told another time how in the garden, in the Krishna book reading, he said to us, in India, all the women are married. And if there's no available husband, they are married to trees. And we were all going, what kind of trees? And an Indian devotee said, that was a joke. I didn't realize he made jokes for a very long time. And when I was always in awe and reverence. Je anilo premadana koruna prachu. Jai Anilo